I'm so honored to kind of have this conversation with you. I think I've never seen this bringing together of health and all of this from an indigenous perspective, and and then your backgrounds are stunning. And so I guess the main question is why and what was the inspiration of the seven circles and trying to get this part or this angle or this idea out in the world.
You can start.
Okay. Well, it's important to give context to. There's a lot of ways directions we can go. That's why we kind of look at each other. But I think it's
Please.
also important to give context to what the history of our work is people working in our communities, in Indigenous, Native American, First Nations communities, and the work that we are doing is really a part of a greater movement that has already been happening, a Native wellness movement,
Mm,
which is a movement that's been happening. It really started in the '60s with
mm,
alongside the civil rights movement. The Red Power movement was a part of that as well, where Indigenous people were starting to get out and advocate for policy reform because they were experiencing poor social economic living conditions and degradation of health. And
mm,
so the Native wellness movement started, kind of came out of that, and was largely focused on sobriety from substance and alcohols, addressing domestic violence, addressing sexual violence. And that's what I was raised going to those gatherings when I was younger,
mm,
like the mid 90s. And when me and Chelsey got together in about 2013, we just kind of started collaborating. We both had a shared passion for health and wellness, and had a shared passion for our Indigenous cultural teachings. And there was some overlap there, but we bridged more of the gap a little bit later on, also based upon our own lived experience. But we started traveling native country to do share our version of Indigenous health and wellness. And we were really based on this concept and idea that in order for us to preserve our indigeneity, our identity and our heritage, we have to be in good health to do that.
yeah.
And at the time on social media, there wasn't really anybody sharing for native social media these sorts of concepts. We're trying to bridge these gaps here and trying to connect the dots. And so we started traveling around native country because I was already kind of doing some work similar to that with the Native Wellness Institute. And Chelsey had been also on her journey and writing a lot about native issues, indigenous issues, and such. So we created Seven Circles a few years down the line after we started traveling in native country and throughout parts of Canada. And we realized, well, we need a model to start to teach us something that's comprehensive, something that's easy to follow. Let's break things down, and let's, I guess, demystify some of these things here. And there's a lot of things that cannot be diluted and simplified. There's a lot of nuance between things, as you know, with health and wellness. But we started to think, what were the aspects of pre-colonial, pre-industrial, indigenous way of life that allowed these people to thrive in the conditions that they did, in the weather conditions that we did, to develop the societies that we did. What were those aspects? So it came down to that. We thought about that. Well, it's all of our foodways. The food sovereignty is a big thing in Native country. Foodways. People had revered sleep time. Everyone had modalities of movement. We had ceremony for everything. And our living spaces, our spaces for education, our spaces for gathering and ceremony and social gatherings were considered very sacred. And then also inherently, our way of life was on the land. Everything, it came from the land and was curated by the land. So the land is just so overarching our connection to the land right there. And we did everything in those in groups and societies, clans, families, and there was a whole social structure that we abided by, and there was teachings that our people had really followed. So we thought, that's our template right there. And every when we travel on native country, we ask native people, plug in your teachings, use your people's languages in each of these seven circles right here. It might be a way to sort of like reset people's approach and thought. So we incorporate a lot of what we're learning also too from Western medicine, cutting edge new science, and alternative medicine, functional medicine, and things like that. We tried to pay attention to those things and see what it is that they're concerned about, and we kind of dig into our history to find those similarities.
Yeah, I mean all of what Thosh said is absolutely part of my motivation as well. And we met because of our shared interest in health and wellness and in connecting our cultural teachings to everything else that we were seeing kind of in the modern health and wellness world. That was a journey that each of us were on as individuals, and it's what brought us together and then eventually, resulted in our work and in this book. And for me, a big piece of it is also about, and I don't like to emphasize this all the time, but if I'm honest, in one of my early motivations for sharing a message about Indigenous health and wellness was in defying stereotypes, because it's so frustrating that every time you turn on the news, every time you turn on a movie, anytime you read an article, anything involving Native American people, we're downtrodden, we're depressed, our reservations are horrible places, we're all alcoholics, we're all this. I mean, and it's so far from the truth. It's so far from being our complete story. And when you learn about health and wellness as in the health and wellness industry today and everything that people are trying to reach and trying to achieve, I never heard the word wellness in my household growing up, but our spiritual teachings and the way that we learn to pray and the way that our elders led their lives, that is wellness. That's what people are seeking now. And so for me, it's like, I want to share this story of this aspect of our culture that's so beautiful, so healing, and so far beyond the stereotypes.
Man, I'm just so I'm actually a little choked up. I'm just so happy to hear, and I mean, I don't know you, but I'm just touched because
Thank
we
you.
we have gotten so far away from the fabric of who we are. And I'm not going to make this about me, because Native teachings did a lot for me in my life. Um, and fuck, sorry.
Is that right? We appreciate your heart and your emotion shown.
And I just, when there's no intention behind what people are doing, or this weird tension, intention that destroys rather than creates and uplifts and heals, and you see it so much, and like you're saying, um almost keeping that story alive, especially in your group, just keeping that desperate, horrible, destitute story alive, just so they can keep a narrative. And it's all about that. It's like the whole fabric of these narratives just keep, and what I've learned in my life is, like, when you show up, when you meet, when you connect, when you meet people where they're at, it's always a different story.
Yeah.
um so god damn, sorry, I just didn't expect all that. But um I guess my first question is, how has the reception of the Native peoples of you, obviously you've been doing this now for years, and going out and mobilizing this, and creating a structure for more resiliency and sovereignty of health again, how has that reception been?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would start by saying there was a huge there's a huge demand for it in Native country, because I think we all know and we recognize that we have a lot of trauma that we're healing from. And so we need a revitalization of our wellness teachings. It's like, even though we've carried them on, it's been carried on in small pockets and in small movements. And there's still a lot of Native people who we're trying to heal, just like everybody else.
Right.
And until our wellness teachings become culturally relevant and culturally inclusive, then we can't fully get there. And so, like, there's an organization that we work with called the Native Wellness Institute, for example, a nonprofit who has been kind of doing workshops and wellness trainings in Native communities for over 20 years. And Thosh kind of grew up attending their events, and we're now trainers for them. And so through them, and then also independently, just through our own work as consultants, we have been asked by hundreds of different tribes and communities to visit there to share what we know about health and wellness in a way that is inclusive of our own people and of our own teachings. So the reception has been really enthusiastic in that sense. Now, of course, anytime you're teaching health and wellness, I don't care where you are, I'm sure you've run into this, you run into resistance as well, because it's a really hard thing to talk about. Because when you don't feel well, when you don't feel healed, when you don't feel justice, and like you have access to what other people have access to, and like you weren't raised with the different things other people were raised with, and so you feel so far behind, and it starts to get a little it is difficult. It's really difficult sometimes to have these conversations. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're grateful to have gotten the opportunity to write this book after a decade of doing trainings in community, because we've learned to work through a lot of those nuances and to be far more inclusive and far more aware of different triggers for people, I think, than what we were aware of when we started. And I mean, anybody's going to have to go through that process who's in the health and wellness world, because you're going to learn really quickly that you just have to be really careful with what you say and how you say things, and at the same time to be really open and honest about your own journey, and just like you said, trying to meet people in the middle all the time.
Yeah, it's listen, there's a study out of the Mayo Clinic. This country, there's 2.7% of people that are healthy, like through lifestyle and food. So it's a horrible scenario, and the fact that we're staring at it everywhere to make it a subset of a group of people is ridiculous, because the mass population is just under this spell of the system that has got sick, and the lack of sovereignty at its core of keeping this kind of crap going, and so I can't imagine the layers of that as well, uniquely to the Indigenous people, and so, like, navigating that, what are some of the subtle things that you saw or see, and maybe some examples of what works and what doesn't, and maybe some some examples of how applied, and maybe even some testimonials of how what's occurred for you over the decade, of how people have embraced and then the transformation.
Yeah. A lot of our feedback that we hear right now is a lot of just anecdotal evidence from people that have been maybe attended some of our trainings, maybe they've just been following on social media, and at this time, that's what we have. And our goal, one of our goals with the 7 circles as a model, has always been to get it in a place to be implemented in some sort of institution where health is facilitated, some sort of healthcare center. We're hoping that is a health and human services department somewhere on some reservation, or now really anywhere, will be interested in adopt that model. We have this model adopted even for diabetes prevention, and there's even a lot of evidence studies that can be cited with each circle that support the role of each circle's the role it plays in the prevention of type 2 diabetes, because we know that it's a lifestyle disease, right? That's preventable. So that's our goal. Our goal is to try to implement 7 circles, and the way it's designed is the person is at the center, because of course is healing and wellness starts within our hearts, our minds, our spirit, the spiritual, physical, mental, emotional state of a person. and on the outside of that person there's another a layer of circle there. That's all their family, their loved ones, people they live with, people they cherish are in that circle, and all those people have their circles too. Beyond that is the community that this family is a part of, and beyond that is the world at large, which also considers the animal nations, the natural world. We're all integrated, in these different amongst this network of living organisms. We're a part of that. So the model is really something that can be adapted on all those different levels. It can be adapted and applied in school settings, workplaces, and the policy of a workplace it can reflect that. They can be blended in there as well. So, as it stands, that's where we are really just limited to just the testimonies of people. We always get contacted from people on social media, or when we run into people in the community, like within my own community. We live down the street from my community, and when we also travel around the community of people within the Phoenix metropolitan area, the Native community, then we run into people everywhere that give us some kind of testimony really casually, and it's very rewarding for us, and we feel good. We feel really good. We're really happy with that. But we know the impact is yet to be made, and the book for us is a way to not only contribute to the greater movement and to cement our place within this movement of healing and wellness, but also to try to get it into the hands of people that have the power to apply this in various settings. It's a healing centered wellness model, a healing centered wellness model where we are looking at not just trying to prevent disease or manage disease, but looking at thriving, living well, living connected, living a long life, a quality of life with those that you love, being able to do the things that your ancestors have been doing for thousands of years. That's really what our aim is for that. So, anything?
Yeah, and then kind of to answer your question about in our individual lives, I think there's a few big phases for me where in connecting my spiritual upbringing to wellness teachings and applying those has caused huge transformation that I think has been inspiring for other people. One is in kind of examining the normalization of substance abuse in American culture and removing myself from that pattern. So I'm sober. I have been since I was 25. I'm 34 now. And I'll never go back. I mean, I didn't go to rehab. I didn't hit rock bottom. Those aren't phrases that I would necessarily use to describe my journey, but I did observe an unhealthy pattern. And I said to myself, I don't want to get deeper into this, like I've seen happen to so many other people, whether back home on my reservation or whether in my Ivy League classroom or anywhere in between. I've seen it destroy lives. And so emerging from that pattern and denormalizing that and getting comfortable with being a person who says, yeah, I don't drink and I'm happy and I'm having fun, that has been huge. Another one is after becoming a mother, a wife, and having a family and decolonizing a lot of the traditional like American ways of like child rearing and pregnancy teachings and all that kind of stuff, and learning how my ancestors did it and trying to apply in today's world has been hugely liberating. And I think my kids are really benefiting, our kids are really benefiting from that. And so just like kind of those are two phases that have been really big for me and that I think have inspired others. Well, I hope so. Anyway.
Yeah, well, that's huge. I think, what you're saying is, there's so many aspects to this that, is screaming at us from a modern day world, right? I call these fatal conveniences, right? We are doing things, we've adopted these things, we're just doing it because that's what's occurring and that's what they do and that's what it is and that's what we eat and all of this shit. And you come to realize like, oh, none of these things have my interest, my best interest in mine. And we have to, empower ourselves, right? Again, to just like, and Tosh, what you said too was this idea of separation, that we are not a part of everything, and that lack of integration of every choice and every, why are you doing this, is it does it have integration in the kind of life that you want, it mentally, emotionally, spiritually? Is the food I'm eating, is the habits I'm having and choosing, is that going to work, or is that just the path, right? It's like everyone, anyone listening to that, we wake up, we're automated, we unconsciously do most of our day, and then barely assess, is this what I want? Like,
Yeah.
is this beneficial to me and my family, and like, or am I just head down doing all this shit?
Going
I
through the
think,
motions, you know?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. What was
absolutely.
the awakening of you, for you, Tosh? Like, what was that kind of moment that I was just like, hey man, I gotta change some shit?
You know, I can't ever recall like very specific moments, but I just feel like my whole journey of healing and journey to seeking to living well, and living comfortably has just been this long, really drawn out
Yeah.
process where I don't have too many things I can think of except for, like the time, like Chelsea, the time when I decided to quit drinking alcohol. I didn't drink alcohol until I was in my early 20s, until I moved to college, and I grew up on the reservation. But I got a full ride photography scholarship to go to San Francisco. And I was raised in a family where my mom and dad quit drinking early on, and they started going back to ceremony and getting involved, with our spiritual ways, and that's what they raised us in. And just for me, traveling throughout different ceremonial gatherings to the different Native communities here, that we're part of in Arizona, I was always raised, and it was made very clear that substances, alcohol, lateral violence, and such, those are not our ways, and that we shouldn't fall into dominant society's ways and take up those, and we should try to be close to each other and close to the earth, live close to family, they say, and try to do things on the land, and continue to keep up our spiritual ways, because it's our connection to the land. It's who we are. And I followed that until I started going into the city, and I started getting influence and experiencing, trying to experiment, what is this, and experiment with substances and alcohol and going to parties and events, and from one extreme to another, as you can tell, that's how fragile we are as human beings. That's how fragile our nervous system is. And then, we can just become so adapted to that, and the brain wants this, then here's that behavior pattern. So I started that in my early 20s, and then it was around, I tried to quit in late 20s, and then quit for a while, and then started back up in like 30, and then quit right after I turned, or right before I turned 31 or something like that. So that was one. If there's anything I can think of, it was around that time, because I was already in my early 30s, late 20s. I was already really trying to stay active and be well, and in that sense, like I grew up being very athletic. So being active was never a challenge for me. And I started changing the way I was eating like 12, 13 years ago, and which that was a long journey in itself, or whatever. In this past like 10, 12 years of changing to find out what works for me, and what's culturally relevant to me. But I would say in my early 30s, about 10 years ago, I just had lots of moments where I was finally able to step out and look at myself, and look at how I was being, and how I was acting, and what did I have going for me. What did my future look like? Because I always had aspirations. Ever since I was little, I always had visions of what I wanted to be, and I had to really look at those, and ask myself, I want to be this type of person. As I get older, am I headed in that direction? And assessing where I was at the time, and I realized that going at that trajectory, I wouldn't be able to be someone who is living well, walking well, comfortable, and busy. I always knew I wanted to be a part of something larger, because growing up in Native communities, traveling Native communities, I was exposed to this idea of reclaiming our indigeneity and healing. And so I always knew I wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself. I've always aspired to that. And once I was able to quit substances and alcohol, and really get back to learning, not just accepting what was being shown to me in the cultural settings as far as our spiritual practices and worldviews, but I started to really seek out more and more and seek out knowledge keepers and ask questions and then try to practice, try to put this stuff into practice. And so that's where my background is. I don't have any credentials or accolades in Western culture or anything like that. I tried to go to school for photography and then, didn't finish it. And for me, and that's part of my journey to, I guess, decolonize. That's not a term I use very often, but for me, is to put value on Indigenous knowledge and practice, try to learn that and apply that, and to be able to share that in grassroots settings, but also sharing that in a professional sense. So that's really my background. But I think that, it was about those years ago when I started to have those realizations. And then another realization again when Chelsey and I started to brainstorm and put our minds together, and because we got together and we thought we want to share another message on Native social media, because no one is talking about health and wellness as it pertains to the passing of vital Indigenous knowledge. No one's talking about health and longevity and how important this is. There was a gap there, so we tried to fill that gap with our initiative online. But I think around that time is when I started to connect more dots and understand how inextricably connected all aspects of our life really is, and I started to from there dive into that. So I've had these steps, to kind of realizations.
It's a journey, right? And it's like
Yeah.
we're just peeling or unpeeling really, like these layers of what we think we are.
Yeah.
And Chelsey, like what are some of the tools and the tips that you guys have kind of found and applied, and like people listening, they're like, okay,
Yeah.
well, Indigenous wisdom, I can understand it from we are all connected in that sense, but how are some things, because again, how we started, more than ever people are fragmented and pulled and
Yeah.
told a vision through television, like we're lost. So what are some of the ways that people can integrate, ground, connect, and that you all have discovered over the years?
Well, there are so many pieces of health and wellness that I think were normal for our ancestors and for their lifestyles that are totally not even thought of in the wellness conversation today. And that is why, for example, in the Western wellness world, we always talk about diet and exercise. Diet and exercise. Like those two things are so straightforward and like they're so separate from each other, but really they're not. So integration, like you mentioned, is key. And there are, food is one of the seven circles. Movement is one of the seven circles. So yes, diet and exercise absolutely matter. And hopefully within the book, we've expanded everybody's notion of what it means to approach a movement practice or to develop a healthy relationship to food. But outside of that, there are these other circles of wellness. And so my tip would be, for example, sacred space, how you care for your home, your environment, your surroundings. It could be something as simple as clearing off the table before we started this podcast interview, because a clear space gives us a clear mind. It allows us to think, it allows us to feel some semblance of peace, because visually it really matters. If we can be a little bit more minimalist and tidy, we can clear space in our minds. Something, yes, letting natural light in instead of having these like fluorescent lights blaring on us like so many people are accustomed to. Taking care of your space, cleansing your space, and having reverence for your space, viewing that as a sacred space that you spend your life in your home or in your office or wherever it may be. And so let's put some love into these spaces and think about the degree to which that impacts our sense of well-being. So that's one of the circles of wellness, and there's so many tips within that. But yeah, that's one example.
Well, and it's so important too, because I think the stat is like now we live 93% of our lives indoors, right? And
Yes,
now
yes.
to your point, if you're not walking in your door feeling uplifted and connected to it and nurtured, then oh my, if you're spending that much time but it is true. There's as within, so without, right? So if you're living in chaos,
Hmm.
how are we supposed to organize our mind
Hmm.
if we're mirroring it back and forth to each other, right?
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think that's a massive, massive point. And then obviously then food and movement, and then like looking at ceremony, break that down for me in the way that people listening to this can also go, yeah, I
Hmm.
can understand that.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you bring that up. And one of the things that we write about in the book is, listen, we are absolutely not inviting people to mock or appropriate our culture, which happens a lot in the wellness world and which harms Native people. What we do hope, though, is that everybody can connect to some form of ceremony that is authentic to them. And peeling that back a little bit, knowing that we don't have to have this appearance, this performative spiritualism that is so just
It's
cheesy and prevalent
so
in wellness,
crazy.
right?
It's so crazy.
Thank you. I'm so glad you say that.
Oh my God.
Um,
I just like run the other way. I just,
yeah.
you can feel it. It's got all the look, and I'm just like, see ya.
And it's just, it's usually for economic, I mean, it's just
Yeah.
exploitative, it's gross, it's not at all what we're doing here in the ceremony chapter. But what we are doing is saying, look, in day to day life, we can turn these moments of routine into ritual. We can elevate simple practices like putting our kids to bed or like doing our, washing our face and putting our skincare in the morning. And when you just simply decide in your mind that you're going to put some intention into that and positive thought and it totally transforms some of our daily habits and elevates those into rituals that bring meaning and vulnerability into our daily lives. And another piece of that I always like to mention with the ceremony chapter is silence. We live in a very, very noisy, chaotic world because of our smartphones, because of traffic, because of overpopulated urban areas, because of so many things. The 24-hour news cycle, our world is chaotic and noisy. And so part of ceremony is finding space and time for silence every day, visual silence, audible silence, simply sitting in your bedroom and breathing for 10 minutes. I mean, again, you don't have to do this whole performative act to become a spiritual person or to incorporate ceremony. And I hope that that's what people can take away from that chapter.
Right. And it doesn't always have to be shared on social media to be validated, you know? And that's something that's really, been a prevalent practice in Native communities since the camera first came around, or in those this in that era where most of our people were still, a few generations back, were still living largely connected to the land. No one had a lot of electricity. Even my dad's generation, they didn't have electricity for a long time, and they had a radio and they had a candle, and this was like this is like the 60s 70s on the reservation, and a
Wow.
lot of people live like that on a lot of reservations, and so they were what was I going with that?
The ceremony and how you don't need
Yeah.
it to be on social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Right.
before people had gotten, really knew what the cameras were, they were already, they already knew, the spiritual leaders knew this isn't something that should be around. We shouldn't allow that the ceremonial gatherings to be recorded. And as I start to get older too, and I hear more people talk about it, and I simply heard one person simply say, they said, it pulls out the integrity. It takes away the integrity of what you're doing if you're trying to take that experience and send it elsewhere for someone else to witness that weren't there. I heard someone put it pretty simply like that not too long ago. Some guy said that about 8 years ago. But so I think about that too. So, let people know that ceremony isn't, you don't always have to advertise that you're doing it for it to count. And that's something that is very, very personal. Ceremony can be very personal to a person and their family. It can be very private. And that's what it is for a lot of people. We encourage people to have that privacy in that sense. Ceremony is the act of acknowledging and honoring anything that we have a high spiritual reverence for. And we do that on an individual, family, and a communal. We do this daily. We do this a certain time of week, possibly. We do this certain seasons. We do this to honor certain celestial events. And so there's many different, reasons and ways to have ceremony. There's many different formats to have ceremony. But like Chelsey said too, being ritualistic to me is a little bit different. Ritualistic is really kind of bringing, like the way Chelsey had expressed it, it's bringing some more meaningness to the things that you do on a daily basis. And I think that there's a lot of evidence too about just neurologically how neural networks are more connected when ritual is applied on a daily basis. People can look that up. But for instance, to give an example, like something that I would say that would be more ritualistic for what I do is pretty much every morning. I greet our oldest daughter. She's 4.5, because me and her sleep in one room. But I get up and I do my whole routine in the morning. But when she starts waking up, one of our routines is I greet her, pick her up, and give her hugs and ask her how her sleep was, and then because it helps me too, and then we'll go to the window and we'll open the blinds. I said, "Do you ready to let the sun in? Do you want to let the sun in and say hello to the sun?" And she says, "Yeah." So I carry her up and she opens the blinds and the sun comes in, because we're teaching her the importance of sunlight. Sunlight is revered as sacred for us. That's one thing. When we give thanks in spiritual acknowledgments, we give thanks to the sunlight. So that's one thing. Let the sunlight in the room, because that starts the day. And then when I get up, my first thing in the morning, that's one of the first things that I do. This time of year, the sun comes up much later, so I'll just I'll open the living room windows and let the glow come in, and I'll sit there. And on a good day, I'll meditate. I should meditate every morning, but on a good day, I'll meditate while my coffee steeps. And then if I don't get to the meditation, if it's kind of late and the kids are getting up soon, then I'll at least sit there and I'll sit quietly and I just try to visualize the day. And I'm always try to remind myself of the teachings that I'm supposed to live by. And for the household, for the family, it's first and foremost being patient and responding to everything with love, and just trying to embody that patience, kindness, love, honor, respect, and trying to be that first and foremost. So that's sort of the things that are running through my mind to kind of remind me this is how you're supposed to live. This is the agreements that you made. You made these agreements with the universe, the great creator, that this is the way you're going to live. So I kind of do those things, and that could be something that's ritualistic in a way, that's ceremonial in a way.
Well, it's and yeah, and that is it's personal. I had a friend of mine said, "Just for me, don't have to tell anyone." Right?
Yeah.
It's like, and there is that part of it, and I can't help but to the ceremony, and then as you were talking, ceremony can lead into greater ceremony, and then that bleeds into community, right? So let's talk about how, for me, I lost this property burned down in 2018. Everything here was like wiped out. And the thing that the people ask me, like, what was the most powerful thing about it? I mean, aside from the grief, it's connection, it's relationship, it's people, because those connections and people and that love, that was the very first thing that came at me was, "I'm sorry, we're here for you. What do you need?" And it's like, if that's not the most obvious, powerful medium in this world, aside from nature and the force of nature and all of that, but that connection that we get to have and we get to nurture or not nurture, like for me, that seems to be just way up there on the importance list.
That's wealth. To me, that's true wealth.
It is.
Abundance of connection, support, love with people. That's one of the aspects of true wealth for sure. So that's good you were able to build that. You built that, and that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the community circle is another one, like we talked about earlier, that just gets totally neglected from the wellness conversation. Diet and exercise, diet and exercise. No mention of community, no mention of family, of healthy relationships. But that's everything. I mean, we've all had that feeling of, an interaction with another person that was negative, or maybe even an unhealthy relationship that we were in, that can be so mentally degrading that it becomes physically debilitating, and you can't do anything, you can't think about anything. On the opposite end of that love, that nurturing that comes from when we do have those healthy relationships and we cultivate connection and we feel like we have others around us supporting us to rely on, not just right here and now, but even expanding that, like our people teach, intergenerationally. You know, in Native communities, we talk about our ancestors all the time. We know that there's this long chain of people that have come before us who have put love so that we could be here today. And we know that it's our role and our duty to do the same in our lifetime so that we can pass that on to our descendants, and for, even if we don't have children, to the future, you know, inhabitants of this earth. And we don't have to know them personally to love them. And that's a normal conversation. And I hope that, you know, others can take that and sort of understand the world in that way, in the way that Indigenous people teach this intergenerational love. And it helps you because you begin to feel, yeah, I do have my ancestors behind me. I do have community around me today, and I can recreate and rebuild those connections, and it will make an impact for the future.
Yeah, I love there's so many cool aspects of this book, the mindfulness, meditations, the gratitude, and there's all these cool little nuances that I see, like the electronic sundown. Like, talk to me about that. Like, those little things are so powerful.
Yeah, you know, as we are in this age of plenty, this age of technology, we're immersed in it, we're conditioned to just accept that the devices and the way that we live today is very normal and there's no repercussions to our overall health. But as we know, is what certain recent scientific evidence teaches us, is that our interaction with blue light emitting devices can potentially have a role in hindering our sleep. And so that's what, you know, that's also very congruent with a lot of knowledge that we've heard our spiritual leaders talk about in Native communities. And not to get into talking about any too many specifics or whatever, you know what I mean, for our cultural privacy, but that was something that I heard one of our spiritual leaders talk about. Is she discouraged, especially for youth, being too immersed in these devices, because she says that she had broken English, but she said it's not right for their mind. It won't be right for their mind. And it's like, you know, 15, 20 years ago that these things were being said, and we were discouraged to be watching TV all the time and to interact with these devices. But there's a lot of things like that, you know, that we kind of hear from different spiritual leaders around Native country, that I guess their intuition can tell. Maybe their intuition can read this magnetic frequencies that's coming off out of the cell phone, the computers, the TVs, you know, the laptops. And so that's what electronic sundown is basically trying to realign your circadian rhythm with the sun and moon cycles. As I said earlier, in, you know, my father's generation, my dad's in his late 60s, but when he was younger, and even people living in their 50s in my community in Salt River talked about not having electricity for a long time, until like the mid 70s or whatever. But they always said, and this is what I talked to a lot of people in my community, they said, when I asked my dad, you know, when did your grandparents, because he was mostly raised by his grandparents, when did they go to sleep, when they wake up? He says, well, in those days, no one was out at night. You know, once the sun was going down, everybody was going in their houses, and they were starting to, you know, they will settle down. He says that they'd light a candle. Sometimes they'd listen to the radio, like news, or sometimes he says that his grandpa would be reading a paper or whatever, and then they would get ready and they'd go to sleep. They were waking at sunrise. They woke up at sunrise. They always had a routine. He said they would go out. It was the evenings. They always went out to give thanks to the sun. They'd acknowledge the sun. At dawn, they were always out, always up, doing things. So they ate 1-2 times a day, maybe 3 times a day. Mm-hmm. And so, this type of lifestyle, that's how we lived for billions of years, right? Human beings lived in this sense. It's only in this recent decades that we have been sort of, off track, and now we're experiencing this collective degradation in health, incidents and negative health outcomes as one of this. And what I'm talking about here is just one of the factors that's driving that. So electronic sundown is really just trying to get our circadian rhythm back and get us in a routine of sleeping, waking, eating, training at the same time. And that's something that we try to do in our home. When the sun goes down, we don't have all the lights on. We try to dim and only have a few lights on, because it's also said, there is some scientific evidence coming out about this too. It's also said that the blue light can hinder melatonin, which is that hormone that prepares for sleep. And so we try to minimize that. And if our daughter watches her Kindle at night, we always try to put the, that warm tone shade on there. So we just try to do things that
Yeah.
encourage people to sort of, I guess, start to think about going into the sleep time, start respecting sleep and recovery, and start to abstain from interacting with many different devices and having the lights blaring, TV going, iPad going, and just immersed in this technology that can really disconnect us from our true essence of being human, and connecting with those that we love, and connecting with the natural world. So the electronic sundown is really just, I guess this is like a little tool. Doesn't work for everybody. People can apply it to whatever works for them, but that's really what that's about.
Yeah, and it's listen, all this stuff, we've become so apathetic to
Yeah.
just, this is just what life is. This is just
Yeah.
what I do. And these things and what you guys have put together, the idea is like going back to this innate, deep, common sense barometer that I think we have in there. And if we just allow and apply some daily ritual and habits that get us back to these things, and at this point, is anything perfect? No. Like, but at least we can take care of our home, take care of our family, start to cultivate this better sense of balance. Because
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's so off base if you
Yeah.
just look at some of these. I mean, the back to the children, the mental health of children at an all-time high. It's
Yes.
across the globe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, well, and all of our ancestors are like going, probably a bad idea, right?
Yeah.
And because
Yep.
you see it, I mean, look at anyone in the restaurant, put their headphone, look at it, look, put their head down, look at a phone. Like
Yeah.
they're gone. They're not
Yeah.
even there anymore. They're
So many
in a
people.
virtual world somewhere.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, and here's the thing, like Thosh and I are always upfront about, we struggle with these things too. We're addicted to
sure.
technology to a degree. We use it for our work, and it's just, we don't expect people to be perfect. We don't expect ourselves to be perfect, but at least once you have that awareness that, oh, maybe my technology addiction is hindering my health in X, Y, and Z other ways, because it makes me more sedentary, because it is visual and audible noise that removes me from any ceremonial practice, because of all of these myriad reasons. The news I read stresses me out. The people I see on social media make me feel less than. Okay, so at least if I identify that, I can then begin to develop a plan to sort of try to fix it. And little tool, for example, like even though we use our phones every day, one time that we will never be on our phones is while we're eating. And that's one, I would say, I don't even want to call it a rule, but just a self-imposed guideline that has worked really well for our relationship and for the structure of our home, is there's no technology while we're eating.
Or visiting with family when they come over.
Right. We're hanging out with family. We're talking to each other. If we're at a restaurant, we're actually appreciating and focused on our food and each other. And eating is something that you do every day. So if you remove technology from eating, that one simple tip can change every day for you for the positive. So that's just an example.
I love that. And I'm gonna just call out everyone right now who's listening. I'm gonna challenge everybody right now to follow that rule. And well, let's say a guideline.
Yeah.
And apply that. Try it. It's gonna be right. It's gonna be, you're gonna have withdrawals. It's gonna feel weird. You don't even know who you are without it connected to you. But I'm telling you, you could change the fabric of families and friends if all those people put their phones away while they're eating. And then it goes back to your other points. That can then innately become a food ritual, which then supports community, right?
Yes,
And then it's that
exactly.
pleomorphic effect that it's just like,
Yeah.
listen, it's not just about the cell phone. It's not just it's a
Yeah.
disconnect, and that disconnect has downstream gnarly effects that are underpinning the fabric of who we are as people. I mean,
Hmm.
period. And that's where it's like, again, all of these things are intimately connected to a web and a system. So if we're doing one thing, it's affecting everything,
Yeah.
right?
I love that. I love how you made those connections, and that's exactly what we hope that
Yeah.
people will draw from our book.
We talk about, that's why we modeled these in a circle, not in pillars, not in as a bullet point. We put them in a circle with branches, and we put spiritual, physical, mental, emotional at the center, because those, we are made up of those spiritual, physical, mental, emotional states of being, and those states of being are affected by the life ways that we implement associated with each circle.
Yeah.
The practices that we have with food, how we acquire food, what we choose to support, whether that be, where we choose to purchase our food, how we choose to acquire, if we're foraging, if we're hunting, fishing, farming, what ceremonial practices that we have associated with those. Who do we do this food with? Who do we prepare this food with? How often we have all these different things that we could zoom into right there, and that interacts with community of circles of community, because we're doing these things. Food, eating food and cooking food is a very special and sacred thing, because it contributes to our well-being, and that's always been revered as something very special. We do that with people, we do that from aspects of the land, we do that outside on the land. We're incorporating all these circles of community. From there, we're fostering the sense of belonging, the sense of connection to something larger than us. We're fostering this connection of purpose, a deeper purpose for existing and living, that goes beyond than just what we are fed from dominant society. And there's so many different things there, and so the circles are all interconnected. When you move one, you're going to move all of them. Just like if you move that spiritual state of being, it's affected. It's interconnected to how your brain works, how your emotions work, how your mechanics work physiologically. These things are all interconnected, and we're kind of hearing that, especially those that are very familiar with natural medicine or Eastern medicine, functional medicine. Those that are familiar with those practices are very familiar with this concept of things being whole. And that's something that in Native people we've known since time immemorial. And this is what our people still talk about within the privacy of our communities. We're just two of them that are sharing it, but most of our people know a lot about this, and they are very private about what they do this. But the way you expressed it to me, that's great to hear that you get it, and that's what we really hope for people to take away from the book. Is one of the many insights that we hope people take away from the book, is the interconnection, how all these things are inextricably connected. And so it's a paradigm shift from dominant society's approach of looking at everything compartmentalized and just being able to isolate one aspect or something, and not expect anything else to change. Like the American political system is structured that way. The economy is structured that way. The healthcare system is structured that way. Like social structure is all modeled after that. And we're seeing where we're at now. We're seeing the heated social political climate. We're seeing the high incidence of modern diseases, more than ever, as a result of all of this.
Yeah, that's a we can jump down that rabbit hole for a few hours.
Yeah.
But it's a lack of, it is myopic. It's in pillars. It's separating everything, and you separate it, it doesn't matter, because we are whole. It is holism. We are connected. There is zero separation. It only happens in the ego and the
Right.
mind. So it's
Right.
like, yeah, so when we do that, it has the effect. Look at the healthcare system. It absolutely, there is no health. It's sick. It's all of these things. So all of these things are need to be acknowledged for the truth of what they are. And I love the fact that you're bringing these things together and this holism approach. And Tosh, I have to say, if I make it, I go to Arizona every so often, we have to do some earth gym shit, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We gotta get to it.
Yeah, we'll take you out
I
for sure.
I have a whole group of stones that I've gathered at my
Cool.
place that I like to throw around. So
Nice.
we'll do that one day. I look forward to
Yeah.
that. But
Absolutely.
hey, thank you for the work that you're doing, for the message that you're willing to share outwardly so that other people can. My hope is that the spark of their hearts, their real sense of themselves, the common sense kicks in, and that they will not only get your book but apply some of these powerful, subtle things you can do to integrate. And again, I'm going to say it one more time, people, put down your damn cell phone while you're eating. Let's make a movement right now. Yeah. So thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you so much. It's been an awesome conversation. So great to be here. And we're just grateful that you invited us in to connect with your audience and your network. So thank you.
Thanks
You bet.
again for reading our book and having us on, and thanks for the conversation, and thanks for promoting the book. And I'm just so happy to hear your takeaway from it, and happy to hear about how you're living your life in that way and
Yeah.
sharing that with your listeners and the community around you.